Okay, well, it's just about according to the computer here, it's 12:01, so I will call the meeting to order. Julie, roll call, please.
Is Julie, yep, there she is. Julie, you
Yep.
are muted.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Now
All right,
you're
Mr.
on.
And just before you start, Julie, if who's ever logged in as Manistee County, is that Susan?
That would
That's
be
Susan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure who that was.
All right. Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Dantz,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Here.
Ms. Goodman, Ms. Kaminsky,
Here.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
and Mr.
Here.
Gentili.
Here. Good to hear you,
Okay.
Andrew.
Thank you. You as well.
Did a good job on that. Putting them back in there, Jeff. Good job. Okay, welcome on board, Andrew. Okay, moving on to approval of agenda. I wanted to make one change to the agenda and add ad hoc committee as D under committee reports and discussion. Do I hear a motion to do that, or?
Yes.
Okay. Do I hear a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you.
Was that
Julie-
Andrew? Did he make the motion?
No, that was
Bill.
Bill.
Okay. All right.
And Cindy seconded.
Yep.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Ms. Kaminsky,
Yes.
Mr. Dantz.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. We will move on past public comment because we have no public here to comment. And moving on to approval of February's meeting minutes. I've reviewed it myself. I saw nothing that I thought needed to be corrected. If there's something that somebody else noted in there, please speak up. Otherwise, I would like to listen or have a motion presented to accept the meeting notes as presented.
So moved.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Julie, roll call, please.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Ms. Kaminsky,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Dantz,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to the Treasury Report. I assume everybody has gotten a copy of the February 2021 Accounts Payable Report, has had a chance to review it, and if there is any comments, let them be heard now. The only comment I have, looking at it, is Barry, I see we have animal and plant health inspection services. I've got a question mark. Was that for kind of pigeon control or something else in there for that $1,500?
Actually, I have a question mark by that too. So I don't recall what that is. So I was going to ask Susan if either here or offline, if you could let me know what that is.
I'll send that to you, Barry.
Okay.
So Susan, it's
But it
legitimate,
looks
right?
like it's a annual inspection that they do. We paid it last year too.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Is that something that comes directly to you?
I got it. I did forward it to you, and then I
Okay.
got a second request for payment. And if we wouldn't have paid it, we would have been out of compliance and it would have been late.
Okay. Okay.
So
So
But I
I'll
did
just-
look and see, and we did pay it last year too.
Okay,
so.
I'll follow up on that and just
Yep.
to understand what that is.
Yep.
So, okay,
Okay, Barry,
And
I
then
also see we had, go ahead.
No, mine's on the next, so go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna make a comment here that, we had a service call on the boiler, and it looks like it was simply a service call, and apparently nothing came up abnormal on it for the cost of $120. Is that correct, Barry?
there was nothing substantial wrong. I don't
Right.
recall exactly what they needed to do to get, and this was basically out in the our truck barn, our equipment building.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
that heat had gone out in there, and they were able to do whatever was necessary, but it wasn't
Right.
significant other than getting a technician out here.
Okay, good, okay. Susan, did you have a comment further?
Just
the
on the
next
next
page.
page, under the revenue
Okay.
and expenditures.
Okay, could I have a motion then to pass the, approve, the February 2020 accounts payable as presented?
Chairman, this is Andrew. I just had a quick question, and I believe I know the answer, but I just want to confirm from Barry that historically, due to seasonality, we're running 4% behind on the revenue side and 7% ahead on expenses. Is that just typical historical seasonality, or are we running a little bit higher on expenses thus far year to date?
That is mostly seasonality, although one of the items that is coming up in, and you're jumping a little bit ahead because
Yeah.
you're focusing on the revenue expenses where Susan also has some questions. There's some items that have been paid that will be reimbursed through grants that are a little bit higher than normal, so that's impacting the expense side right now. So it's a little bit of the seasonality and also some kind of one-time grant eligible expenses that have been paid but not reimbursed.
Andrew, did that, answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Going back to the accounts payable for February 2021, could I have a motion to approve that?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll support.
Okay. Julie, Phil supported and Jeff supported, so either one.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Ha,
Yes.
Ms. Kaminsky.
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
and Mr. Dance.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the February 2021 revenue and expenses and our summary sheet, trial balance sheet.
So there are a couple things on the revenue and expenditures. So when you
Okay,
look
go
at
ahead.
that, yeah, so when you look at the net revenue and expenditures and you see that negative 52,703, most of that is accounted for from that line item of the miscellaneous state reimbursement, the 49,714.75. That's that PFAS grant that we have to pay and then ask for reimbursement. So the other board member that made that comment about the expenditures being kind of higher, that's why. If you take that $50,000 out and you divide that by your budgeted number, you're actually running right about 38, 39%, which is about where we want to be. So we'd almost be at the break-even point without that state reimbursement that's in there. So it's a little misleading when you look at it. So if you kind of take that line item out of there, that's more where we should be. And it's at the very bottom at the expenditures under miscellaneous expenses, state reimbursement.
Correct.
Yeah. But other than that, everything else is running about where it should be. Does anybody have any questions for me?
just to let everyone know that Karen just joined us.
Hello, Karen.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. Any other questions on the February 2021 revenues and expenses for Susan or anybody else?
Actually, Susan, I do have a question, and that is, I know some monies have come in for car rentals.
Yep,
but
that'll show up
it's-
on the next report because
Okay,
it wasn't
just-
receipted until March.
Okay, it was just a timing thing. I just wanted to.
Yeah. It's a timing issue, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Barry,
Okay, well-
the $20,000 that was in the original budget for state reimbursements for revenue,
Yes.
is that in addition to the 49,714 that was just talked about, or is that part of that?
That is in addition. So
Mhm.
since the budget was put together, this PFAS grant of about $200,000 was awarded, and that was not part of our original budget. So the $20,000 are more for our typical grants that we expect to get every year, marketing, firefighter training, etc. But on top of that is this additional 200,000, and that 50,000 are expenditures as part of that overall 200. So it is in addition to, and at some point during the fiscal year, we probably should make some budget amendments to reflect all of those items.
And I may have misread the minutes, but is that $10,000 from the state still coming? Because I thought I saw an asterisk or a note saying that that's not expected now for this year.
So again, yes. So based on what we had planned versus, what is happening, that 20,000 probably isn't going to fully come in this year. But our expenditures are adjusted to reflect that as well.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, could I have a motion, please, to approve the February 2021 revenue expenses as presented, as well as the trial balance sheet?
I will make that motion to approve the revenues and expenses and the trial balance.
Okay. Do I hear a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay. Julie, did you get that?
I did not. Who was that?
Cindy.
Okay. I thought it was you, but it was very faint. All right,
Okay.
roll call, Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Ha,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
and Ms. Kaminsky.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. Executive Committee did not meet. Budget Committee did not meet. Capital Projects Committee did not meet. And while I'm on those two committees, we are shy. Well, we've only got two people on each of those committees right now. And I did ask Andrew whether he would be willing to sit on those two committees as he has done in the past, and he has said yes. So at this meeting, I will go ahead and appoint Andrew as a participant of the Budget Committee and the Capital Projects Committee, if no one has any objections to that. Okay. Moving forward. The agenda where I made the adjustment was for the ad hoc committee. We did meet a couple of times in the last 3 weeks, and we have come to a adjustment to our airport rules and regulations that will satisfy what Barry was looking for to enforce our car rental situation and flight instructor and airport mechanical situations, airport aviation repair services. I think everybody should have gotten a copy where it was blue lined as to the changes. And I'm going to let Barry go ahead and fill us into the changes. He was instrumental in putting these together, and it satisfies his needs. And we made some adjustments and so on when we were discussing the meeting. So I think we're in good shape. So Barry, if you want to go ahead and go through it.
Okay.
We'll do.
Thank you. I'm just going to walk through the changes in the red lines / blue, which is like, for some reason, the color, and just kind of explain what they are, what the motivation was, etc. So in addition to some boilerplate and the table of contents, which changed earlier in the document, this is really the first content change in section 200.22. The sections in the 200 range are all about expectations for users of the airport. And therefore, this particular section, as it was worded, didn't really fit that layout, in that it was really more talking about a business, and the businesses and kind of commercial opportunities are really all in the 300 series sections. So the content here has essentially been moved to a 300 series section. And what's been placed here is just a very simple section or sentence that basically says it's the responsibility of aircraft owners and operators to ensure that others who are doing work on their aircraft are abiding by the rules in section 300.3. The reason for that is that if an aircraft owner or operator calls in somebody onto the field to perform maintenance work, that person they're calling isn't necessarily going to know what the airport's rules are that they may be subject to, and it's the responsibility, therefore, of the aircraft owner or operator to ensure that they are communicating with anyone they bring on site to do work on their aircraft, that there are rules and that they should be aware of them. So it's just kind of touching it from the aircraft owner's operator's responsibility, as opposed to an individual or business who's doing maintenance work here. So that's what this change is about. And then moving on to chapter 300, where all the rest of the changes occurred. One of the things we did as a committee is we looked at examples of essentially comparable airports, or not so comparable as the case may be, but trying to find examples of other airports and what their language is. One of the ones that we not necessarily every airport publishes this information on their website, so we generally just looked at those that we could find easily via web searches. So the three airports that we looked at were Pellston, which had a lot of good information, being a Northern Michigan essential air service airport like us. Livingston County and then Oakland County were the two other ones. And just because they had different aspects that Pellston didn't. One of the things that came out in reviewing all of those different kind of comparative examples were that a lot of the text in the following business-related sections ended up being repetitive in nature because every section said, you need to follow the rules of the FAA and your state and federal regulations. So instead of repeating all of that, this first change here under A, which is kind of just a general requirements for all business activities, really has added that kind of concept of basically calling out that all individuals and companies providing aeronautical services at the airport must be in compliance with all state and federal requirements for providing that service, including but not limited to appropriate FAA licenses. So kind of in one catch-all, we're doing that as opposed to repeating that for each type of business later on. So that's the change there, adding number 1. The next change really is on number 3 here. And that is one of the things that we're trying to do in this change is clarify the difference between an individual providing a service because they've been asked onto the airport by an aircraft owner to assist them with their needs, and contrasting that to someone who is operating a business on airport property providing that service. And this item number 3 here was calling out flight instructor specifically, and that is really unnecessary once we start clarifying that there's private aviation related services, which are essentially that service being provided by someone who comes onto airport property, but they're not running a business here, but they're, being called in by somebody, versus a public service, public aviation service, which is someone's basically setting up a business and saying they're operating out of Manistee Airport. So calling out flight instructor here was redundant because that's covered under private aviation services, which is still left here. So that's what that change is about. Some reordering as to how things go. So this first section 300.1 was just general requirements. Then we had last insurance requirements, which is kind of another general requirement for all businesses. Instead of that being separated, we moved that up to section 300.2. So you've got general, you've got required insurance, and then we get into the business specific rules. So the car rental moved from 300.2 to 300.3 as a result of that. 300.3 here for car rentals, which is one of the motivations for looking at updating this. A lot of the input we got came from the Pellston Airport's example. Theirs was much more verbose, got into some very some specifics that I think are more specific to the issues they have at their airport that I didn't see were necessary at our airport given how we operate. Although in the future they might be if things change. So this is really a very condensed, straightforward, shortened version of what Pellston had. So I'll just read through what this new section is, and it basically completely replaces the previous car rental, taxi shuttle, etc. section. First thing is the title: car rental, taxi, shuttle, and other ground transportation providers. Previously, this just mentioned car rental, taxi, and shuttles, but with the rise of Uber and Lyft and other types of ground transportation, we really wanted to make sure that this included all types of ground transportation operating commercially or providing commercial service at the airport. So starting off then, car rental, taxi, shuttle, and other ground transportation providers must have an operating agreement and or license with the airport in order to operate on airport property if they generate more than $1,000 in annual gross revenue from airport-related business. So one of the issues we have today is, as it relates to rental cars, is historically there's been our primary on-airport provider of rental cars, and then there have been a couple other businesses that have dabbled in it. And also as it relates to other types of services, occasionally we will get a limousine service showing up here to pick up a passenger. Often those companies are coming out of Grand Rapids or Traverse City. They're not going, and technically under the old wording, they could not do that if they did not have a license. But for kind of a one-off or something that happens infrequently, to me, it doesn't make sense that I should be policing a limousine that shows up to pick up somebody and say, oh, you can't be here because you don't have a license, you have to leave, and then their passenger has no transportation. That doesn't suit anybody's needs. So to address that, putting in kind of this expectation that if you fall into that, it happens once a year or a few times a year, or once period, there's not an expectation that I need to police and basically be out there saying, if here's a contract, you got to sign this contract before you can provide your service. But if they're a regular business and they're generating revenue on a more substantial basis, that they do need to comply with having an agreement in place. And ultimately that's so we're protecting our revenue streams and making sure that we are getting an appropriate, being appropriately compensated for the fact that we are providing their customers to them through our facilities, and that maintaining our facilities costs money, and therefore that revenue generated from that needs to be contributing to our facilities. $1,000 in some ways, that you could argue that maybe that should be 2,000, 500, 5,000. The committee discussed this and we talked through pros and cons of a higher number, a lower number, and ended up with this $1,000 number of revenues kind of being a good place to kind of draw that line. So that's background on that first sentence. Fees and terms of licenses issued under this section shall be set by the airport authority. So, and per our overall operating agreements or rules with the FAA and DOT, we have to do that in a fair and equitable manner across different providers, so we can't play favorites. Moving on, each rental car operator shall make available an adequate fleet of recent, and recent here is being defined as less than 75,000 miles on the odometer, recent rental automobiles in popular price ranges that shall be cleaned in between rentals and maintained in a safe and fully functional operating condition. Rental car vehicle maintenance and service shall be conducted exclusively at an off-site facility. This is, again, much shorter than what Pelston had. Although it adds in a definition of recent, whereas Pelston just said recent rental automobiles and didn't define recent, we attempted to put in a metric, again, that kind of helps define that. And again, the committee, talk back and forth is, should that be a number of years. So an age of the vehicle, number of miles, is 75 too high? At the end of the day, we felt this was best balance of a variety of different priorities in thinking about how to define recent, but providing some guidance to me as the director on how to enforce and an otherwise undefined term. We didn't go into the same thing as what is fully functional operating condition mean, because we couldn't come up with a single easily defined metric that defined that, but felt it's important to have that specified here. And we can either attempt to further define that in the required contract or operating agreement with a rental car firm, or it just gives me an opportunity to open up a conversation with our vendors if there are situations where I feel that condition isn't being met, and we can talk about it. And that, I think, will address 95% of the issues, is if there's an expectation, and an opportunity to really just have a conversation about how a vendor is performing. So that is the language as it relates to transportation providers and rental cars. Any questions?
Harry, just a couple quick things.
Yes.
One, there's a small typo in where it says form instead of from after the 1,000 in annual gross revenue.
Okay.
And then how do you track the Uber and all that? How do you know who's actually picking up and not picking up, and whether they hit that number? How does that work?
As of right now, there really aren't any Uber or Lyft drivers in our area. So I'm not aware of any Uber or Lyft activity here at the airport. However, at any larger airport, this becomes a very touchy point. And those operators know that airports are going to have generally special conditions for operating out of there. And therefore, once I start seeing activity, I will then reach out to those companies and basically say, okay, we're an airport, here are our rules. We need to make you aware of them. And then they have in their technology platforms ways of, making sure that, for example, like we do for car rentals, where we have a 10% airport imposed fee, that same type of structure would, apply to an Uber or Lyft, as it should for a taxi service as well. And they have the mechanisms on their platforms to implement those fees if they know the pickup or drop off is happening here at the airport. So again, when I start seeing that activity, that then gives me the ability to reach out to them and basically say, okay, you need to flag us, and here's our fee structure. As of now, again, it's not something that A, there really is any activity, and B, until these wording changes, we didn't even have a mechanism to allow me to reach out to them and say that we need to start collecting a revenue stream from them. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I see this playing into kind of a longer term scenario as it relates to that type of activity increasing in the Manistee area. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to aviation repair service. And the sense of this language, a lot of this is really just moved from the previous 200.22 section and brought down here. But I'll read through it. All individuals and companies must check in with airport administration prior to performing private aviation related repair or maintenance services. These private services are defined as being services arranged by an aircraft owner or operator with an individual or company that has a base of operations at a location other than the airport and travels to the airport to provide services to the aircraft owner or operator. This check-in process will determine the identity, contact information, and type of work to be performed. It will also allow the airport to assist the individuals with access to the location the work needs to be performed in accordance with safety and security regulations. So this is doing a lot of different things. One is people just can't come onto the airport and go anywhere on the airport. Our safety and security between our Part 139 and our TSA basically has restrictions on who can do what on the airport and who needs to be escorted and all of that. The real, idea here is that if someone's coming into the airport, even if they're working on someone's private aircraft, we as airport administration need to be aware of that so that we can inform them of what they can and can't do and figure out a plan for them to do what they need to do on airport property. And again, that whole first section is dealing with that private service where it's just someone coming in to work with an individual aircraft or owner's needs. Then the second paragraph, no person or company shall offer to the public any aviation repair or maintenance services on airport property without an operating agreement and or license from the airport. These public services are defined as identifying the airport as a place of business and holding out to the public an offer of providing services at the airport. This is really just saying that if you are, advertising and, saying that you're running a business out of the airport for aviation services, that you have to have an agreement with the airport on that. And that agreement would specify any terms that would be appropriate for the nature of that business. In the examples that we looked at, there were some significant things put in place that really, given that we are starting from having nothing right now in this area, don't make sense. So for example, some of the things that came out of some of the other documents we looked at said, you have to have a minimum of 1 acre leased. You need a building of X thousand square feet minimum size. It has to have restrooms and all sorts of things that if we were to implement anything like that, we would never have a business operating here because the barrier to entry would be so high. This just puts some very basic stuff in place that says you have to have an agreement in place. You just can't willy-nilly do things here. And as we go from no businesses to hopefully some businesses, over time, we'll figure out really what the appropriate baseline may be in any area. And then we can always come back if appropriate and, kind of enhance these rules and regulations as we know more. But we don't want to be a barrier to entry by having such outlandish requirements that no one's ever going to operate a business here. So that's the thoughts and rationale behind the language for aviation repair service.
Barry,
Yes.
quick question just for my understanding. It may just be my lack of knowledge in this field. For consistency's sake, in the definitions on page 9, it's called aviation-related repair services. On page 24, we call it aviation-related services. And then here on page 26, we call it aviation repair services. Could we kind of condense that all into maybe just aviation-related services?
We certain,
Because in the definition, it's named one thing and it states everything that you're stating,
Right.
but then we don't
right.
use that terminology later in the document. So I'm just wondering if we can just consolidate it all into similar wording.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense, and I would recommend that we do that. In going through this document, it became a little bit clear that the last time this was revised, which was 2011, kind of a similar process where because the 2011 version of this is completely different from the previous version that existed before that, which was from the late 1990s. The 2011 version started with a template being acquired from some airport and then bits and pieces acquired from other things. So there's a lot of internal into the document where terminology doesn't flow because of depending on where that piece was, copied from. But since you've identified an issue, I will go and clarify that terminology.
Hey, Barry, this is Julie.
Yes.
Karen said that I don't know if she got knocked off or whatever, but she's trying to get back in.
I see her now.
Okay.
She should now be back in. So thank you, Andrew, for that comment.
Okay.
And then that is the totality of the changes that came out of the committee. My recommendation would be that I take the input, specifically that last comment from Andrew, that I incorporate some of that cleanup around terminology and then bring back a final set of proposals for the board to approve next month. Any other comments or questions? And Jerry, if you have anything to add as chair of that committee, please do.
No, in fact, I was even thinking about doing just what you proposed, that we'll let everybody think about this, look at the changes, and then make these adjustments, and at the next meeting, we'll quickly read it or look at it again and vote on the changes. Thank you, Barry.
Barry, just two quick questions, if I could, Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
The definition for advertising, is that meant, these rules and regulations, Barry, are they just strictly for on property? Or do you want to have some say or control over how they're advertising in the digital space as well? Because digitally is not mentioned in that definition. So I didn't know if you were just talking on property stuff or.
The spirit of how this document was originally created is on premise. And again, that wording is now 10 years old, and it probably was copied from a document that was at the time 10 years old. So the origination of that wording probably predates a lot of digital marketing. So that is something that, could be cleaned up if, if we thought necessary. One thing is, I would say, is that we could spend more time and just do a lot of internal cleanup on this document. Again, because as I've been going through it, I've just noticed differences between definitions and how they're applied in other areas. The goal for this review was to basically make sure that the wording for these few specific areas, rental cars, maintenance, and then as it may relate to flight instruction and sightseeing flights, those were the focus. So one of my goals would be to get those changes approved sooner rather than later, but it would also make sense for the, if the board so desired, for the committee to spend more time doing a more comprehensive review of the entire document, if that was a goal.
Just one last question. Sorry to keep interrupting, Chairman. Is there a definition that you use, Barry, or is it somewhere stated elsewhere of what is considered an abandoned vehicle?
I am not aware of one, no.
I noticed that that's in this rules and regulations, and I know last year we had that vehicle out there, and you said it's not unusual for people to leave their vehicles
Yep.
out there for a season. I just didn't know if we had a understanding of what is considered an abandoned vehicle.
No, we do not. We have not attempted to define that.
Yeah, some of these things, where they happen once in a blue moon, it's kind of hard to put them all into rules and regulations. So I think what we'll do is what Barry suggested, is that we'll make these changes, put them together, let everybody think about them for the next meeting and approve these, and then make a decision as to whether we want to go further into this to see whether there's things that are language in it that should be cleaned up where it reflects saying something different in the front part versus the back part, and go from there. Any other comments, changes from what I suggested we do? Otherwise, we'll do that. We'll look at it for next week or next meeting and then vote on the changes at the next meeting. And as I'm saying, as people look at this, if there is things that pop up, bring those up at the next meeting and we'll make a note of it and go from there. Any further discussion on the rules and regulations and what we just talked about? If not, Gary, you're up again on the airport director's report.
Okay. Why am I not seeing? Hold on as I try to switch to sharing my report, which for some reason there it is. I hope. No, that's not it. Close this and reopen it. There we go. Okay. So as often is the case, this first page of my report ends up being kind of a dumping ground of just various things that are on my mind and I want to make sure, or I want to make sure the board is aware of. So, but starting off with no accidents or incidents to report for the previous month. Toward the middle of last month, the State Airports Conference was held virtually this year, and nothing really that significant coming out of that this year. We did have it, which is the first one we've had since the one we had a year ago, as the fall one was canceled completely. I had some communication with Board Chair Mr. Haw on this, but just to make sure you are aware that I did submit a revenue sharing grant application for the casino revenue sharing funds for a camera security system for the terminal and parking lots. One might be surprised to know that we have no security system here at the airport, even though it's a relatively new facility. And while it doesn't happen often, there are a few incidents that would have been helpful if we had something in place. I've had requests from TSA for video footage where a passenger has basically filed a complaint that alleged TSA stole something out of one of their bags as it was being inspected, that type of thing. And we've not been able to accommodate requests like that. Another area that is a risk is that technically we are, even though we are only manned certain hours of the day, The terminal is available to the flying public 24 hours a day to use the restrooms. So if an aircraft comes in at midnight, there are instructions that basically are available to pilots that basically say how to access the terminal to use the restrooms. But we have no video or surveillance for those people in the building after hours. So there are things like that. You know, as it relates to the parking lots, recently a rental car was returned after hours, damaged, and the claim is by the person who dropped the vehicle off after hours was that it must have been hit in the parking lot, that when they left it, it was undamaged. There was other evidence, since there were no pieces or parts laying on the ground next to it, that isn't a true story. But things like that would be helped if we had some sort of camera system. So that's some of the motivations behind that grant application. This is something that we haven't talked a lot about recently, but this is something that I think is potentially going to be an issue. And I'm kind of raising this more so for the county commissioners that are on the board. We have an obligation per our security plan with TSA that there is periodic law enforcement officer activity here at the airport. And that's basically always been in place since essentially we got TSA service, you know, now 15 plus years ago. That stopped in early November. We've not had a single law enforcement officer out here since then. Corresponding to this is this issue around grant funding from TSA to help offset the costs of providing that service. So I've recently dug up the necessary grant applications to do that. Taken a first pass of thought, but there are sections I don't have the information for that need to be basically filled out basically by the sheriff's department as it relates to specific questions that are directed at them. And I've sent that over to Sheriff Katowski, and twice now, I mean, an initial one about probably
Gary, you've gone quiet.
He froze.
Gary, can you hear us? Let me go see him for a minute.
Yeah. Leave the door open if you need to.
The system crashed.
Well, mine did too.
I was just talking to Barry, we have a technical problem, his system crashed, so he's in the process of trying to reboot, and hopefully we don't lose the whole system when he reboots. So give him a few minutes and we'll see what happens.
Ought to be enough time for Julie to reset her clock.
Okay, can you hear me again?
You're back on board, Barry.
Okay, not sure, but apparently Zoom crashed there. So let me get back to my.
Barry, I'm gonna say you just pushed the wrong button.
So I'm not sure where I dropped out in talking about Leo coverage.
You got to
you
the
were talking
point where
about-
you said you sent it over to Gatuski and something about 2 times, and then we lost you.
And I haven't heard anything back. So I guess the first question I have for those affiliated with the county is, has his email changed as a result of him becoming sheriff, or is it the same email he's always had? Because I'm using the email for him that I've always had.
Yeah, it would be the
believe
same one.
Email is, pardon?
It's the same email. That did not change.
Okay.
Barry, I will pick this up with Brian. Also, on your grant application for the local revenue board, what's the dollar value on that? And did you put everything from soup to nuts to get that installed and completed?
So it's about $10,000. I don't recall the exact number. And we got 2 quotes for it. So I'm, for full installation, and, there will be an annual maintenance / service to maintain some of the licenses and stuff for the software. But that whatever the grant amount it is, will fit within both of those quotes. If we were to get less, we could decide to only do internal or only external in the building. I mean, there are different ways that we could probably work with something less if that were how it turned out. So thank you, Jeff, for following up with Sheriff Katowski on that. And again, it's not common that he's always been responsive to my emails in the past, and the fact that he hasn't responded just causes me to be concerned.
Well, did you notice Karen popped up a little? He's had some problems also trying to get through on email.
Okay. So that's what that is about. And so the last item here is a topic for the board that the board spent some time, now roughly 2 years ago, is the issues with the definition of maintenance around the fueling equipment, and that all got cleared up. I've been holding off, especially the last year under COVID, of doing much in the way of extra expenditures. But I'm fairly confident where we are right now with our budget to actually finally move forward with that. So I'm basically this week going to be requesting quotes from the 2 vendors that do that for airports, so that later this spring or early summer, that work can finally get done. So I just wanted to let the board know that I'm moving forward with that. And at the time we last looked at this, it was about a $10,000 expenditure. So just to give the board a heads up on that.
Well, Barry, continue moving on that. I think it's something down the road that we should have in service.
Oh, we need it because we are technically not in
Right.
compliance with
Right.
state on, because we're not able to capture all the necessary data
Right.
that we should.
Right.
Right. It's just the timing is, I think now is the time to pick that up again.
Yeah, I recall that from our previous discussions.
Yep. So as it relates to kind of the other side of that is additional revenue that I'm, now forecasting is last month I was saying that we should be getting about $10,000 from the December stimulus package. As the formulas have been calculated, that will be $13,000. And I've submitted a request that we would be interested in receiving that funding. That was kind of the first step from the state. And in last week's stimulus package that was put together, there's essentially they use the exact same wording and language and amounts from December. So I would anticipate an additional $13,000 coming down a little bit later. So between those two, $26,000 of additional revenue that was not budgeted, I am now anticipating this year, which is one of the reasons on the fuel system monitor that I feel that we're in a position where we can start spending on some of these projects again. So I just wanted to give everybody an update on that. Now,
Good.
if we had 10,000 passengers and were considered a primary airport, we'd be getting $1 million plus in each of these bills, but we're getting 13,000. But it is what it is.
That's correct.
Moving on to enplaned and deplaned passengers and airline performance. So for February, we had a total of 404 passengers, which is actually very good considering where we are and where travel, especially air travel, is in our country right now. If you notice, if you go back, that exceeds what we did in that month in February of 2019. So we are now doing better than pre-pandemic numbers with Cape Air providing service, even though nationally, the national air transportation system is still at roughly 50% of pre-pandemic levels. So I'm very encouraged where we are and what the outlook is for summer. As it relates to performance, the cancellation rate on the airline of Cape Air has been, fairly consistent and, not perfect, but also not at all bad, 4%. And for February, almost all of those, if not all of them, I didn't actually verify the exact number, but most, if not all, were weather related, which is something we would expect since February was kind of our month of winter, or at least 2 weeks of February were our 2 weeks of winter this year. So, from a cancellation standpoint, doing well. The delays are higher than they should be. And actually earlier this morning, I had a conference call with Cape Air, both Linda Markham, their president, Dan Wolf, their founder, and Andrew Bonney, who's my regular contact. We basically had a touch-up call. I raised this with them, and they're going to start digging into it as well. What I'm seeing is that it's the morning departure that is typically what is delayed or late. The other 3 flights of the day tend to be either right on time or early, the vast majority of the time. But getting out of here in the morning on time has been problematic. But having said that, their current schedule has kind of a lot of extra padding built in. So it hasn't really gotten people into O'Hare late, and therefore hasn't really been impacting people's connections. But it's still something that, if the schedule is published and it says you should leave at a certain time, my expectation is that you should be trying to do that. So there's improvement here, but it's not been a significant performance issue as it relates to connections and actually getting places on time. Any questions on, enplanements or performance?
No, but you should talk to them like you're going to do, because it is a pain in the butt there when you say it's supposed to leave at 8:15 and it's 8:20 all the time.
Yep. Now it's more like 8:40, and it's supposed to leave at 7:15, and it generally leaves around 7:40.
Okay.
But still gets in about on time into O'Hare. So now I gotta rotate this so you can see this. Airfares are starting to change. I think the United and American and the mainline carriers are starting to come out of COVID pandemic mode and are starting to try to return things to more normality. And that's causing our fares to come up a little bit. So if you look at the change from the previous month, our average fare was actually up $28. Grand Rapids was up 22. Muskegon was down actually, and Traverse City was about flat. The range between Grand Rapids and Muskegon is actually about as narrow as I've ever seen it. So I'm starting to see changes in how the airlines are pricing, and they're, less just trying to get anybody to fly by offering a, $39 fare, and are more trying to generate some revenue from those that are now starting to fly a little bit more. So as it relates to us, we've had such great fares over the last few months, especially competitively against Traverse City or even Grand Rapids, that as things more normalize, it is interesting to see where we actually come out on this as things are more normal. Again, this was actually something I raised with Cape Air this morning, is that I'm starting to get somewhat concerned that as things get more normal, that our fares are not going to be as competitive. And, what strategies we can put into place and or Cape Air can, put into place to make sure that we remain competitive with, neighboring airports. So not a lot here, but it is just starting. I'm just starting to see changes, and I think we will see a lot more changes as we get towards summer, as things start to normalize.
Harry, just my 2 cents, because I fly every 3 weeks.
Yep.
I can tell you that starting in February, the cost of my flights has gone up almost 25%. And starting with April, I'm actually switching airlines, because for the first time ever, Southwest is more expensive than United.
Okay.
Huh. It's interesting.
Thank you for that data point. Any other comments or questions on this? Hearing none. Flip this around. I gotta flip it 3 times to get it back to normal. Okay, capital projects. Nothing really new here. Our airport layout plan update, that project is really a 12 to 18 month project. I did have one meeting with Priya Newhoff since our last meeting, and really it was more kind of a dialogue and interview of the types of things we would like to see kind of on our long-term future roadmap for the airport, as it relates to aviation-related businesses, as it relates to what we foresee hopefully being our needs from a runway length standpoint to different aspects of the terminal building, and kind of walking through all of that. So I'll be very interested to see how this data gets incorporated into early drafts, and then provide additional feedback as to how this plan for the future of the airport comes together. The goal of this document is it really should be looking out about 20 years, really kind of how the airport infrastructure needs to change to accommodate, the future next 20 years. And it's always hard to predict the future, but if you don't plan for some change, we're always going to be behind on the funding curve for that, because this then flows into potential funding avenues. If it's not on the ALP, it does not get funded. It's not even a candidate.
Barry,
next-
maybe in the,
Go ahead.
Barry, next, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe somebody from Prenoff could give us a 15-minute update on this, as to what they're doing.
That would be a good idea. And I'm expecting that there will be multiple iterations of versions of this.
Okay.
And when we get
Right.
that first draft or something, something on paper, I would definitely want to be sharing that and having Pri Newhoff present it to the airport.
Okay.
Last month, we talked about the preliminary results of the PFAS testing here. That then got submitted to Eagle for the state, and we honestly hadn't heard from them. So Pri Newhoff actually reached out last week and said, can we meet to talk about this? So we're scheduling a meeting for early April to basically get their perspective on what they might be thinking are next steps for us now that that preliminary report is completed. And again, all of this is happening under that $200,000 grant that we talked about during the financial portion of the meeting. Cape Air service. So, many of these things I will have touched on a little bit when talking about the passenger numbers, but go through my bullet points. So overall, the issues that we were seeing kind of around the beginning of the calendar year, with some personnel HR issues, for the most part, are addressed. We're kind of past the bulk of winter operations, so those types of things that can be a drag on performance are now past. Overall, Cape Air is performing well, and I'm very, as I said earlier, very encouraged by where we are with bookings and enplanements, and really, cautiously optimistic that summer is actually going to be very good for us. February was the first month that we were above pre-pandemic levels, comparing now 2 years prior, instead of just, normally, historically, I'm comparing to the previous year, but those comparisons just become completely worthless, going forward. As an example, so in February, we were up 135% versus, a year ago, but up 6% versus 2 years ago. So that's that we are now exceeding pre-pandemic enplanement levels. Talked about an on-time performance, talked about cancellations. March is looking, very similar to February. So I'm hopeful that we will surpass March of 2019. We'll be close. Whether or not we'll be able to, be higher than, that exact number. I mean, we'll be, flat, if not above that 2-year prior number. And what I'm starting to now see is, throughout the pandemic, people were booking 7 days to 14 days in advance, just because always not knowing what the future was going to hold. That is starting to loosen up. I'm now starting to see people starting to book for July, making sure that they've got travel reservations for Forest Festival time, etc. So that window of advanced purchase is starting to return to normal. And it's not everything being, last minute bookings. It's starting to now be a little bit farther out. And, we've already got a pretty good number of people booked for summer already. So that's encouraging, given, again, where we are.
Barry, one question over here. When you mentioned Forest Festival and
Yep.
booking possibly out for that, is Forest Festival on this year? Do you know? Have you gotten some early indication?
Right now, it is tentatively on.
Okay.
That's what the website is saying. They are planning to do it. and exactly what activities, I don't think anyone really knows, but yeah, it most likely will be the first community event since basically last spring.
Right, okay, good, good. Thank you.
Let me interject a second. I will follow up on that, just to confirm. So I don't want to see anybody on this call or this Zoom, think that we're
Right.
definitely going to have a festival at the moment. I'm not aware of what the status is, and other than the fact that I shouldn't say I'm not aware. What I would say is I have not heard any encouraging words in regard to it as of for this year. To be continued, but I'll follow up on this for you for next meeting.
Okay, that'd be helpful. I mean, the information I'm getting is from the Convention Visitors Bureau, because they are taking tiptoe steps to start marketing it. So I believe they are coordinating with the chamber on that, and not, saying things that are known to be true. And they just updated the Forest Festival website with dates and a big tentative label next to them. So that's kind of what I know, and from what I know it. So this issue really goes back to Cape Air starting service last fall and limiting their sales to 8 seats. They are still limited to 8 seats. Earlier, their plans had been that by now they would be operating 9 seats. This came up in my call with them this morning, and they are still evaluating how and when to get to 9 seats. Once we get past winter operations, or the potential for winter operations, the de-icing system on the Tecnam aircraft uses a fluid, and they carry about 130 pounds of that fluid, which is, weight that they cannot then allocate to fuel or passengers or bags. Once we get past the possibility of ice, that, weight savings comes into play. They're also looking at some other things. I actually had a very good discussion with them on things to think about, some data points that I want them to look at. So they are working on this, but I don't right now have a date as to when they will increase that from 8 to 9. But for example, yesterday, Sunday, we had 2 of our 4 flights that were sold out at 8 seats. So while it's not, a significant barrier to number of passengers we're enplaning right now, as we get to summer, it will become that. And I want to make sure that we are ahead of the curve on that. So that's a little bit of an update there. Rental car update. So not a lot has changed here. I have had a conversation with Cody Watson of Watson's. I'm fairly confident that their intention is to do something starting later this year. Have not heard a confirmation on that yet, though. And also, Victorian Carport has reached out to me. We've talked. Greg's been in Florida for a good part of this month. I'm taking a week of spring break off. So we just haven't been able to hook up and have a good conversation of this yet with them. As it relates to our current provider, we are now down to only having 4 vehicles that are in the rental fleet. Historically, we've had 8 to 10. There's a variety of reasons for that. One I kind of alluded to earlier is one got returned significantly damaged, so that took it out of the fleet. So we're getting to the point where this is is going to become critical, or critical in the sense that it will be impacting people you being able to utilize our airport, because we just don't have rental car vehicles unless something changes. Not that that hasn't been an issue at times, but it will be getting worse. But again, there's enough conversations that are going on that I think things are going to fall into place.
Hopefully, we'll see.
Hopefully, yes. I got to be
Yeah,
optimistic.
because four vehicles is quite a reduction from 8 to 10.
Yes. Yep. On the marketing front, my next meeting with we meet twice a month with Cape Air on marketing. That actually happens later this afternoon. So I haven't really had a good high bandwidth conversation for a couple weeks on that. My last call was actually pretty good. And they've been kind of like us, not spending a lot on marketing over the winter. That's typical seasonally anyway, but with COVID and, it didn't make sense to throw money out there. Cape Air is starting to open up their spend. We are doing likewise. So just a couple minor things to mention is that in March, on our social media side, we basically did a social media based contest, register to win 2 free tickets. Very good response on that. We had about 1,400 entries. This is something we used to do probably 4 years ago, where we would do something like this on a regular basis. And at that time, our typical number of registrations for these contests were, between 500 and 1,000. So getting a 1,400 entries into this, actually, I think was very good. It's going to be on our agenda for our call later today with Cape Air Marketing. We want to try it again in April, and then maybe make this a regular monthly part of our overall marketing social media plan. On the Cape Air side, one of the things they are doing is targeting Northern Michigan radio. That's something we haven't been able to do for a number of years now, just because of the expense. And one of the problems with radio, especially, is if you get a more popular station, that their broadcast areas don't necessarily overlap completely with our catchment area. You can get radio coverage in a lot of areas where it really doesn't make sense for people to be thinking about us. So we've kind of not used radio in our marketing mix as our budget has narrowed over the last few years. But with Cape Air's contribution, that's something that they're adding back into the mix. And I think it's overall good. It's just something when you've got a very tight budget, you have to really be laser focused on spending only where you're really confident it's going to have a direct impact. The larger budget, you can do a little bit more. So those are some of the things that are happening on the marketing front. And that is my report. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you, Barry. Good report. So, moving on to old business, unfinished business. I'm not aware of any. Does anybody have any that they want to bring up at this point in time? If not, we'll move on to new business. The new business has to do with some pictures that I believe were picked up on the internet someplace, or Facebook.
I believe they were posted on Facebook, is my understanding.
Okay. So, this comes to us from Karen. I'm not quite sure how to approach this subject, so I think I will go ahead and turn it over to Karen to let her start the conversation on this.
Looks like we
Karen?
lost her again.
Oh my. First off, I guess, another thing I should have asked, did everybody get the pictures that we're gonna be talking about? A
I
copy of
did
them?
not, I don't know what this is in reference to.
Oh, okay.
I should have emailed it to you late last week. No, actually, it should have come from Julie. No, this one came from me. Let me just make sure. I might not have included you because you're recently back on.
These are all our airport.
They were all
Pardon,
taken
Cindy?
on airport property, yes.
Correct.
What
In
was
fact, the one that, say again?
Are the three pictures we got the only ones that were involved?
To my knowledge,
To my knowledge, yes. I mean, I'm sure others were taken, but those are the only ones I'm aware of that were posted on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Barry, I don't know if this is related to the topic that you're discussing here, but I had somebody approach me here at the resort wanting to know if they could do some drone footage. And I said, that's up to the tribal government, but you also have to have airport approval. And the person stated they already had that, but how do I verify that?
The best way to verify something like that is to ask them for their, to do footage like that, they should be licensed. And if they're licensed, they have authority to do it. So it'd just be to ask them for their license number, their FAA pilot license. FAA's created a whole special category for drone operators. If they don't have a license, then they're still allowed to do it, but they do need approval from the airport.
Okay, this gentleman says he has a license. I don't have it physically,
And
but
if he
I
has a
thought there,
license, one more for you. If he has a license, then he doesn't even need to contact the airport. Theoretically, he's supposed to know what he can and can't do.
Barry, I thought there was a 5-mile circumference from the airport that no drones were allowed to fly in.
Unless you are licensed. If you are licensed, then part of that training that you go through is how to safely interact with other aircraft in the airspace. And that training and that license indicates that you've had that training and you are a knowledgeable operator. It is those that aren't licensed that have that 5-mile limitation because they haven't had that training as to how to safely operate with other aircraft potentially in the area.
and there's also a 400 feet elevation requirement or limitation,
There is a
isn't there?
maximum 400 foot. Yep.
Right.
Hey, Barry, can you let Karen in again? She said
Oh.
she's trying to get in.
Yep. Sorry, I was looking for my email. So
That's all right.
Karen, are you back in?
Looks like it. Karen, are you there?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, Karen, did you hear any of the last discussion? We're down to an item that, for new business that we put on the agenda, referring to these pictures that came off Facebook and you passed them on to Barry. So I'm going to open up the floor to you to fill us in as to what your thoughts are.
Well, I think that the rules and responsibilities, whatever, like might be able to address a little bit of this. the biggest concern is, I mean, this is somebody obviously who's has a rental on site. However,
Correct.
and they can do whatever they want, that isn't destructive to the property, but going around our facilities, going in our public areas, doing photo shoots and all this stuff is not really appropriate unless we get into a contract with them. If we're trying to, have a positive image of our airport, we don't want to have pictures that we don't approve or we don't regulate or we don't have any say into. It's kind of like my son, when he works with movie companies, he does photo shoots and you have to get permission. There are liability issues. What if they're sitting on a ladder out, by one of our planes and the ladder falls and, there's injury and stuff like that. So those were the biggest things that kind of jumped into my head. It's like, it's all about our image and we're going to want to protect our image and make sure that we have the right message going out there. So when people use our property, then it gets to be difficult for us to be able to regulate that. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it does. It's just a thought, I guess, on my part. Looking at the pictures, I kind of think they shouldn't have been done and they shouldn't have been posted to begin with. I'm not quite sure how to say you can't do it, because I've looked through the rules and regulations. Unless I'm wrong about it, I see nothing in there. The closest I came to was something called disorderly conduct on page 15. And it talks about an act of nuisance, which might be the only thing that we can, come back and tell them that you can't do that because of these reasons.
And if I could chime in, so a couple of thoughts from my perspective as someone who needs to enforce whatever the board's direction is on this, is the current rules and regulations, as Jerry just alluded to, don't really cover this situation. And that's something why I think it's good for the board to be discussing this. A second thought is where I think it becomes easy to regulate and come up with some rules is if photography/videography is being done for commercial purposes. So if, someone's doing it for, to make money some way, then, clearly the airport has a reason to be involved in that. Where I think it gets challenging is when it's, non-commercial use of, photos and videos, because quite frankly, people take pictures all the time out here. If they're on a sightseeing flight, they want pictures in front of the plane. People stand at the windows taking pictures of their loved ones. So then it's more an issue of content of the picture that becomes a subject of the regulation. And that's a gray area that I really want more guidance as to how to proceed in that area. So those are some of my thoughts as someone who would need to be enforcing whatever wants to do. Go ahead, Karen.
I don't have any problem with people taking pictures of their loved ones, like getting on a plane or any of that type of stuff. The difference that I saw is property. I'm not going to go out to the gas pump and take pictures with the gas pump, So that's not my property. I have no business being there. And if I'm, foolish and hit the gas pump and you got gas all over the ground, then we've got an issue. I'm not going to sit on your lawnmower out there and take pictures. I mean, there's a difference between taking pictures of a loved one, taking pictures. Would you mind if I ran down the runway, taking pictures or if I'm standing down there. I mean, you know, again, it's within reason, and it comes to a point of our liabilities and our reputations. So we want to protect our product, which is our airport. We have a certain product that we're trying to advertise, and we want to make sure that nobody uses it in a way that isn't appropriate for us. Definitely in a liability issue, stay away from our equipment, you know, stay away from our private areas. You know, I get you, Gary, or Barry, people can take pictures, you know, of family all the time, but, and I don't want, you know, I'm the same as you. You don't want to become the picture police. And so, you know, it's just kind of posting a thing about, you know, hey, people, these are private areas, and, you know, you're not allowed on the equipment. And I guess if they're caught, then we deal with it then. But I mean,
but I would say is that in each given, and again, it's the individual involved as a airport tenant. All of the places that the pictures that, you know, are in this example are areas that that person is entitled to use. So they are open to the public for those that are, you know, doing that. So again, I struggle with if they're allowed to be there. It's one thing if, you know, you mentioned out on the runway, you know, I've got rules that back up. You can't be out on the runway doing, you know, random things. But if you're allowed to be in an area, you know, and again, I'll just take an example of, you know, being at the fuel pump, someone having their plane at the fuel pump and wanting to take a picture of their plane. You know, I don't see any reason that should not be allowed. So again, it's more than just location. It does get into content, and I struggle just coming up with a clear set of guidelines that, you know, are more black and white and not subjective as to what is and isn't allowed.
yeah, it's again, you know, it's like, for me, it's like, I could care less of people taking pictures. However, it's just not common that people would sit in their lingerie in our pilot's room. You know, just
no, it is not common.
Right. You know, so it's like,
let me ask this: is if someone just as a public facility came into the building dressed like that, do I have any authority to tell them to leave?
well, that would
Being
be
photographed or not?
that would be based on your policies, process, and what you feel is appropriate. And we've got pretty specific rules in regards to attire. You know, I mean, you're not going to be coming to any of these CMH buildings, you know, dressed like that and not expect that we're going to gather you up and move you along.
And again, that would be great if, you know, we had examples of other language. I'm curious,
Right.
Does the county have anything that relates to these types of topics as it relates to other county facilities?
Oh, I'm sure.
No reason for us to reinvent the wheel if there are examples that we can copy from the county that deal with
you
this
know,
same type of stuff.
Barry, you know, one thing, that example you just talked about where if she was walking through the front door, you can almost go ahead and ask her to, you know, put some, or exit, leave, or put some other clothing on based on the rule disorderly conduct and being an act of nuisance. And in the eyes of the law, when you look that up in the dictionary, you can almost come back on that. But it's a stretch.
Would that be legally enforceable, though?
I'm going to say no. It's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
The biggest things that, you know, it's like, again, you know, I'm concerned about are, you know, I think this was even maybe way over a year ago this was done, but man, these pictures keep kind of coming up to the surface. And, you know, I hear it from different groups of people. It's like, what do you got going on out there? I mean, we're kind of
Wow.
can be kind of a joke. But, so yeah, our reputation, that piece is bugging me. But, I mean, the thing that I'm the most concerned about is how liable are we if anything happens? Why these people are in different places of our building, and I don't know, I guess if she's a pilot, she can fill up a plane and she can use the gas pump. I guess if you want to take pictures kissing it, I don't give a darn, but it's like, it's and it just irritates the heck out of me that we have to outthink this type of behavior,
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you, Barry. It is a thing about now. Here's just another thing I got to watch over because people can't use common sense.
Has anybody spoke with this person?
I'm
Say
sorry.
again?
Has anybody spoke with this person?
I have not, because again, I wasn't sure what I could say because there's nothing in the existing rules that I could find that gave me any leverage to, have a conversation, because obviously if someone's doing this, they think it's fine.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And if I don't have any reason to say, no, this is out of line because, which is why I really wanted the board to provide some guidance.
Yeah.
Well, let me interject just for a second here. I agree with Gerald, and when it comes to the disorderly conduct, that's what I got out of this going through this process was the obscene or indecent act. We could sit and it's subjective if it's an obscene or indecent act. But again, I don't know if the lady in question is a pilot taking the photographs in the pilot lounge as was done. I agree. You don't need to reinvent the wheel over a one-off situation. When a firm conversation could be had with whoever is involved in this process, whether it's the manager, the chair, or if you even want to have myself involved, that's fine. Doesn't bother me. But there again, the subjectiveness of this type of stuff. I mean, we all see the commercials on TVs as well. Where things have gone to from what most of us have grown up with. The tolerance level has changed tremendously over the years, but I agree that the pilot lounge one is definitely probably gone over the top. And again, it's not a good image for the airport in any light.
I could make two quick comments as far as what's acceptable or not. Did anybody catch any of the Grammy Awards last night?
Oh God, they're awful.
I turned it off. I just happened
Yeah.
to flip through and saw something. I turned it off. Now, if that's on television, what happened at the airport is nothing. My second comment is I'm assuming it had to have been after hours because I can't imagine somebody walking in the middle of the day to the
I believe that
lounge
to be the
like
case.
that. But there you've got an issue with who else might be in the building at the time. So I don't know if that makes any difference or not, but as far as trying to police content, we haven't got a leg to stand on.
Well, again, we have an organization out there. We have the airport, and it is our business. And so anything that could, and I can find this language, but anything that could damage, impede, or whatever our public image is not going to be acceptable. So, we can just write that kind of thing into the code of conduct or whatever we want. We kind of have language like that, and I'll dig it up and send it over to you, Barry. But,
Okay.
we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to be very,
exactly.
very cautious about what are people doing when they're, when you see Manistee Airport, they are not representing us. So, they're putting our business at risk.
Now, Karen, there's one picture that we've got of her on the ladder. That picture right there could come back just like you're talking about. There could be some legalities there if she were to take a flip off there. And was the ladder our ladder or their ladder, and so on and so on. I've seen that in my prior work experiences on situations like that. It became one heck of a legal challenge and deal.
Yep. Yeah. So I can dig up what we have and then send it over to Barry. And, you know, it's not going to be anything that you can't police it. You can only provide the information and encourage people to participate in it. Again, it's a shame that we have to have these discussions, but
Right.
I just get concerned when I hear little comments, you know, about what we're building, which Barry does a great job at, you know, getting this organization, you know, to be reputable. And I just don't want anything to take us south of that.
Now, there's one thing I'm thinking that's going through my mind. If you guys would like me to, I can probably touch base with our legal staff, George, and see what his thoughts are and perhaps what we could put into our rules and regulations to maybe somewhat block this down the road or at least flag it.
Couldn't hurt.
Yeah, that's, if you want, that's fine too. I just don't want to get into a big, deep legal conundrum, you know. If we can make it as simple as possible, a few comments
Right.
added into another policy, share it with everybody and kind of make those expectation known. I think that would maybe the easiest way, but that's just me thinking.
Well, I think there might be some merit to what you're talking about, and we should explore it.
Okay.
I do have a comment. I've had my,
Can you hear Phil? He's using my computer. His went to
Yeah,
sleep.
we can hear him.
okay. I've had my airplane here since 2009, and I have never once had my hand on that fuel pump nozzle as this woman has here. This is not a self-serve facility, and like I say, in my 12 years I've had my airplane here, I have never had my hand on that fuel pump. So that is something that I agree with Karen with regard to liability and what have you. She shouldn't have her hands on that.
So you have to have a staff, the airport staff pumping?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
that was one of my questions I was gonna ask about. If anybody that flies in can just get their own gas. So that was one of my questions, but you answered that. So that's
It's
me,
not self-serve.
liability right there. That's a liability for her to do that.
So she is essentially handling equipment she shouldn't be handling.
Correct.
She has no business to handle.
I've never handled that in 12 years I've been here.
Okay.
I have no need to. I can't. I cannot fuel my own airplane. They do it, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But she shouldn't have her hands on it.
Okay. Well, it might come down to a discussion like Jeff talked about, maybe between myself and Barry and whoever else wants to do to get the tenant out there that's on the airport here and talk about these pictures and what our expectations are.
I think this has been a very good conversation, and it's given me a lot of clarity and direction as to where the board stands on this. So I appreciate it.
In our rules and regulations where it addresses fueling airplanes, does it ever state that this is not a self-service operation?
There's a big sign out there that says it.
Okay, good enough.
Just a sign? Who reads those?
It says no smoking, I see that.
Please give a cigarette.
It's there.
Okay, Phil says it's there.
It's out there.
It's out there.
Well, thank you,
Okay.
Mary. And like I said, I don't want to get into having to, have to police this stuff. So hopefully everybody will just understand and move forward.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll leave it. Karen, if you can get that information you were talking about, we
Yep.
can probably bring that over here and take a look at it. And depending on what we decide, I can talk to our legal staff, George, and see what he says if you want me to. And we can make a decision as to whether we pull Mr. Shively in here and discuss things with him as to what we think. And
Yeah.
maybe get something into our rules and regulations here, trying to address this down the road.
Yeah, I think it's good moving forward. I do think this happened a long time ago, like over a year or so ago. So, they might not even think about it, but I think moving forward, looking out for ourselves, looking out for our reputation and our liabilities, I think it's a good move.
Well, it could happen again with the same
Yeah.
person, for an Easter show or something, who knows? But anyway, if there's no further comment, then we'll go from there,
Thank you.
okay? Any other comments by the board members?
Back on there, I don't mean to extend the meeting, but I don't have a check mark on item C in the airport director construction. Did I miss something?
We don't really have any construction projects.
That's what I thought.
There was a slide there that talked about our projects for the year, and that's
Okay.
Yep.
I kind of thought that was in there simply to come as an update for FUZ and the other,
Yep.
the other item you mentioned on. Any other comments by board members? If not, we'll
Just
call the
a
meeting.
quick one. I'm gonna go down and
Okay.
visit the sheriff, soon as this meeting completes. I'll have a chat with him about getting someone out there and see where he stands on it. And, you'll probably be hearing from him or someone from the department, hopefully modestly soon.
And if it's
and then
just
he-
something as simple as my emails are going to a spam folder or something, I mean, there
Yeah.
could be a very logical explanation. It's just concerning me that I haven't heard anything.
And then the other thing, Barry, is as I mentioned prior to the beginning of the meeting, and that was, we need to be very concerned about Manistee Township, making sure that zoning overlay comes into play to where we don't wind up getting ourselves into a jam.
Yep.
That, I can't emphasize that enough.
Mhm.
Okay, if that, no other comments, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.